Well, here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah. We're glad to be with you. We're going to be talking in this segment about the North Dakota Native American essential understandings. And we're really excited to share that with you a little bit.
We've been working on this project now for about 7 years. Well, probably since about 2014, 15.
That's right.
And it's really been an exciting project. It's been sort of grassroots, organically growing due to interest around the state, the interest of the elders, and it's just been a really exciting part of Indian education in North Dakota.
And the whole idea of really transforming education by taking into account the wisdom and the teachings and the stories of the indigenous elders of the area is that I think it's it's groundbreaking. Not that we're the first ones to have done it, but it's exciting because as a person who's dedicated his life to trying to transform education, I like to do that. I think this is one of the things that's making a lot of change that's really positive for our students.
Just so you know a little bit about who we are, I'm Sharla Steever, and I'm a learning specialist at TIE, which is Technology and Innovation in Education, and we're based out of Rapid City, South Dakota. And Scott and I have been partnered on this work now in South Dakota and North Dakota for the last almost 11 years. I think it's getting to be 11 years now. And my background is in elementary education. I taught in Hill City for many years. I'm married. I have a couple adult children, a couple dogs. And we like to share that because I think it's important that we talk about who we are as much as what we do.
That sounds like something we learned from some elders.
I think so.
So I'm Scott, and Scott Simpson. I started out my career teaching high school and middle school, mostly language arts, and then moved into higher ed and worked with teacher training, teacher preparation at several different universities. And for the last nearly 14 years now, I've been at TIE, and 11 of those working directly with Sharla on this work. Have a wife. I live in Spearfish. I have 2 adult daughters. Both of them live here in Spearfish as well, and 1 grandson named Fox, and 4 dogs.
4 dogs.
So we are dog people.
Busy.
Yeah, that's right. They all keep me busy. Yeah. So
I think it's really important to know too a little bit about why we do this work. And who we are and what our role in this work has been, because I think it can be a little confusing sometimes to see a couple people who are not indigenous to this place working in this so closely.
Right.
And so, one of the things that I think is important about the story is that, in South Dakota, we were invited in once the essential understandings were written. The elders there wanted to make sure that the work that they had done, the beautiful document that they had created, got out into schools and was being used. And that's where we came in. We really are the partners who work on getting this into schools, working with teachers about how to teach and how to go about bringing this in a good way. And so then in North Dakota, we were actually involved from the very beginning with writing the essential understandings. We facilitated the group of elders who did that writing. And then we've been working with them and alongside them and with Lucy Fredericks at the Department of Public Instruction for all of these years, trying to work towards getting it out into schools so that teachers can be using it, creating resources, doing trainings, and a variety of other things. And that's what this is today, is just to give you sort of an overview of this very important work.
And I think being able to facilitate the writing of the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings was really helpful to us. I mean, we've been working with Essential Understandings in South Dakota for a while, but seeing the elders share stories, figure out what are the important themes, what are the things that we really want our children and grandchildren to know about themselves and that we want our neighbors to know about us. Watching them in that process was really, really eye-opening and helped us, I think, in all other aspects of the work that we've been doing.
Very much
so. That's what we're going to jump right into, and we'll be sharing some images from the document on the screen for you as we go along. All of this information, the document, and lots of interviews with elders you can find on teachingsofourElders.org, the website that is the home for all of this work.
So as we go through our essential understandings, there are 7 of them. And what we'd like to do in this video, in this opportunity to share with you, is mostly just to give voice to those so that you hear what they are. We'll talk a little bit about the fact that they are in some categories, and just give you kind of a really quick look at what they are, so that as you hear about them, as you're working with them or hear people talking about them, you know what they're referencing.
And near the end, we're going to let you hear one of those elders. Listen to one of the elder interviews connected with one of the essential understandings. Look at some questions that are available for all of those interview clips, just so you kind of know what resources are available when you get to the website. So if you'll take a look at this is a graphic that really came out of conversations with the elders, trying to figure out how these 7 that they had identified, how they fit together. And we have created this graphic, but also color-coded the essential understanding. So the first one, number 1, is color-coded yellow, and it is about sacred relatives and how we relate to everything.
The second one is about learning and storytelling. And this one I find really important, because one of the things that we have learned as we've worked with elders is the importance of storytelling in learning about everything, whether it's about math and science or reading or learning about our history. Storytelling is just really key for that learning.
Yeah. And this blue group is really about that, where that first one was how we relate to everything. This group that's in color-coded with blue is really about how the people sustain and promote culture and language and those things kind of within the community. Number 3 is sharing and generosity, which is a huge piece of what keeps the people together.
Number 4 is a unique one for North Dakota. We love this, and it was not very long after starting to work with the group of elders that we knew we were going to need this, and it's sense of humor. Sense of humor is used in all sorts of ways with the indigenous people in North Dakota, whether it's dealing with grief and death, or it's dealing with just the funny things of life or family. Sense of humor really is something that is very important.
So then we move on to the green section, which is about how we respond to and contribute to all of society, from local to global. So really these are grouped, whereas the blue is about how we relate to each other. The green is about how the indigenous people of North Dakota relate to the rest of the world. Number 5 is about tribal policies, treaties, and sovereignty, and some of the big issues that have impacted the indigenous people of North Dakota historically and continue to impact them today, both for positive and for negative in some cases.
Another one that is about contributing to society is about Native contributions. Exactly that. This idea that so often as we study this, it gets put into history, it gets put into social studies, and not very many other places. Where when we think about Native contributions, there are things happening currently today with leaders from Native communities that are part of business and medicine and education and all sorts of things that are current and are very much contributions to society today.
The last one is on its own. It's kind of the salmon-colored section right at the center of that graphic, and that is Native identity. And that deals with a number of things having to do with things that have been mentioned in others, things like culture, things like ceremony, language, things like that. But really in relation to very much the people right now, today, and how that impacts identities currently. So what we're going to do, that's a quick overview of the categories. We're going to go back through each of the 7, take one each, and we'll give voice to the language of the understanding, and then just share a little bit about our understanding of these understandings, so you'll have a place to kind of begin. So going back to number 1, I'll give voice to that one. Sacred relatives. Native people practice a deep interconnectedness with the land, the resources, the water, all living things, and all human beings. Land stewardship, respect for all two-legged, four-legged, winged, crawlers, and swimmers, and a strong belief in the sacredness of all human beings are key elements for our spirituality. And I would say the key piece to this, I think there are probably two big pieces. One would be interconnectedness, and the second one would be spirituality. And I know in education we're uncomfortable sometimes with spirituality because we want to know how that's being defined. We're concerned about things having to do with our perceived understanding of separation of church and state as we teach. But one of the things that's important about this is the spirituality of indigenous people is not the same as the Western concept of religion or religious practice. And that it really has to do with that interconnectedness, that all things are related, are relative, and that we engage with the other people, certainly, but also plants, animals, even the earth itself, rocks, soil, as a relative, as an interconnected, large living organism. Mm-hmm. And that's a big piece of the spirituality, knowing that I'm part of something that's much, much bigger than myself.
I think also with that, the idea that it's not indoctrination. We talk to teachers a lot about that because they wonder, how is it different to talk about this compared to their own maybe religious beliefs? And I think that's just an important separation to make, that you're not pushing something on anyone. You're sharing about who and what a group of people believe.
And I think we all have to sort through that no matter what it is we teach. Am I helping my students, my learners, to grow into their own understandings in deep ways? Or am I trying to kind of foist upon them something that is my belief? And the first one is what is my definition of teaching. The second one is a good definition for indoctrination. So, yeah.
Number 2, when we go into that learning and storytelling again, traditional teaching and the passing on of knowledge and wisdom was done through storytelling, song, ceremony, and daily way of life, often incorporating specific gender and age-specific responsibilities. These continue to be some of the best modes for learning for both native and non-native learners. I love that this brings in so many different ways of doing that storytelling. We talked about the importance of that, but the fact that there's song and ceremony, and when you think about what happens in the course of a day at school, as often as we can bring those in good and unique ways for learning. Children, I know as an elementary teacher, I used music, I used story as much as I could because it was what sort of gave the hook for the learning, so that it really found a place for them to remember it. And I really appreciate this about the elders sharing that those aspects of learning are so important.
And this is one of the contemporary research around the value of narrative learning through story really supports the things that the elders have known for a long time. So, moving on to number 3, sharing and generosity. Native people have rich traditions of sharing and generosity, which include gifting, shared meals, powwow gatherings, shared living spaces, and care for relatives, including the environment, natural resources, and waters. I don't know how many of the elders share so many stories of both how they have received gifts and support and generosity from their communities, and how they have been encouraged again and again and again to share that from the youngest to the oldest, figuring out what is my responsibility for the community, to be generous, to be sharing, and of course that's what we set up in front of ourselves as something to aspire to practice. And that's just a key piece of the value system, I think,
Yes.
for all the indigenous people in North Dakota for certain.
And part of it is we all find ourselves in need of both of those things.
Right.
In need of somebody being generous to us and sharing with us, and then our ability to offer that when someone else is in need. I mean, those are some basic human needs that we have.
Right. Right.
Sense of humor. This, again, is unique to North Dakota, and I really love it. Native people have a rich history of shared sense of humor that includes teaching stories involving Iktomi, Memegwisi, and Nanaboju. These stories and this unique sense of humor continue to support our resiliency and cohesiveness. These are great. The stories, of course, I think lots of us have heard about the trickster stories and things like that are used especially for teaching children, but people of all ages really, about the things that we should and shouldn't do and what happens when we do things that maybe we shouldn't do. And those are wonderful, but also that sense of humor around, there's been a lot of trauma with this group of people who have lived here longest, and it can be overwhelming. And sometimes using sense of humor to lighten a situation or offer it even as a kindness to if you're in that state of grief or just really having a hard time, when someone you know and love offers something that makes you laugh, that can be one of the best ways of moving out of that grief too.
Well, and the way the elders have shared, the humor is as likely to be heard at a wake or a funeral as it is to be heard in a fun party. It's got a place everywhere among the people. So the next one, number 5, tribal policies and treaties and sovereignty. Native people practice self-determination, developing tribal policies and practicing political activism. Despite a history of U.S. policies and treaties that have often been detrimental, Native people are members of sovereign nations that predate the U.S. government. It's a real challenge. There's a whole lot to learn in this. This is the piece that falls so strongly into that U.S. history piece. And because of that, we know in history there are multiple perspectives. There are perspectives that come from one side, there are perspectives that comes from other side, and then there are probably 5 or 6 more sides or different perspectives to be had. So one of the things that I think is important about this is these are perspectives, becoming aware that there are perspectives among the indigenous people concerning the treaties, concerning these policies that have happened. And there's a way of looking, if we haven't looked at it from that indigenous perspective, we really don't understand the impact of a treaty or a government policy. And recognizing that many have been detrimental in many ways. And that's part of what helps us then going forward. How do we avoid doing that again?
Right. Also, I think in this particular essential understanding is the ability for us to get at the relationship between the reservations, the nations, and the federal government. And we were just working in this school recently where we were talking about this with middle school students, the fact that there are nations within nations. And that's something I think a lot of adults don't understand, that it's not, that a reservation connects or relates to the state first, it relates to the federal government. And that's a very interesting relationship. It's difficult, it's complex, and I think a lot of us really struggle to fully understand what that means. But it's at the heart of how these reservations, these nations function. So when we move on to number 6, Native contributions, Native people continue to contribute to all levels of society, from local to global, in diverse fields including medicine, science, government, education, economics, art, music, and many more. I just feel like that, I was really glad that they wanted to include that, because so often, like we mentioned, it gets pushed into history. Okay, this is great. We have these essential understandings. That'll be really good for our history classes. When actually they need to be brought into any area. You know, it really, whether it's elementary or high school, whether it's reading or math or science or social studies, this needs to be just sort of an infused piece of what we teach because of the place we're from. That's really at the heart of this too. We are living in a certain place, you know, because a lot of people will bring up, well, why don't we have Norwegian essential understandings or German essential understandings where we live? And, you know, there's a lot to learn about those cultures too. But the difference is we are in this place, and it's important for us to know about the place we come from.
Right, right. And to be aware that Indigenous people are active in so many different fields today.
Yes.
And not to relegate them to that stereotype that, you know, Westerns of the 50s kind of gave us. So the final essential understanding is about Native identity. Individual and communal identity is defined and supported by shared Native languages, kinship systems, tioshpai, clan structures, traditional teachings, values, sacred laws, and ceremonies. A continuum of tribal identity unique to each individual ranges from assimilated to traditional lifestyle. There is no generic American Indian. And this is a misunderstanding that I think is really prevalent, that, you know, Indigenous people or Indians are just kind of one colossal thing. This failure to recognize all the diversity, all the uniqueness of all 500 plus nations, languages, cultures that were and in many cases still are present here on this North American continent. Recognizing that, and also recognizing that within the tribe, within the nation, within the indigenous group of people, that there are all kinds of diverse and different perspectives among individuals. That some are practicing very, very traditional lifestyles and very traditional systems and ceremonies and things like that, while others are not. And yet they are still fully indigenous, part of their tribe. They have that heritage. But that's one of those things where we have to understand that they're navigating their individuality and their individual choice on that. So.
And yeah, that's where I think urban and rural come into play. Right. You know, many times if you have the opportunity to live in a reservation community, then you're going to be surrounded by people who maybe are not, you know, fully practicing, but are aware of and to some degree practicing their culture and heritage, where sometimes I feel like what I've heard from Native people living in urban areas, that's harder to not have that place to go to, or just that community of people to come together with. So that can be challenging. You know? So
it seems to me that the job of education is to support all of those individuals in both having access to all of the traditional knowledge and language that they desire to pursue, but also having access to the tools that will help them navigate the broader society when they're away from their traditional culture. How to manage if you go off to university and you are feeling a little bit isolated. How to manage all of that, because those are the individual choices that we have to make as people. So.
Well, next, what we thought we would do to wrap up this particular video with you is to share a video of an elder. And so we're going to share a video of Gladys Hawk, who is from Standing Rock. Gladys passed a couple years ago, but I'm so thankful we have these videos because her wisdom continues to live on through these as different teachers use them and children get to see them and communities gather around her. So we'll share a video.
And this first one really connects in with that number one, with sacred relatives. And so we'll give a listen to this interview with Gladys Hawk from Standing Rock.
As a people everywhere, maybe we should kind of step back and see where we can make it better. Every day there's a train track along where I live. Almost every other day, I see hundreds and hundreds of carloads of coal going east. And I always think, I wonder what they put back in place of that coal, because that's reciprocity. We have to give back what we take from the earth. We're not doing that. And so we're experiencing all of this change, atmospheric changes that's coming. And we believe in a creator who made those for us. And so when we take that belief and we're trying to live that way, and then we see all these new things happening around us, technology, we have to stop and to say, whoa, let's slow down here. What's going on? You know, we have to make some kind of a maybe we have to call on elders to say, what do you think we should do about this? Well, we don't have that kind of technology in our culture to do those kinds of changes. That's all coming. It's already coming, and the scientists are the ones that we should ask them to bring it out in the open. Okay, we're going to cut you off right here. You know, you want oil from the land. Okay, you can do this much. Take so many barrels today and wait another year, you know, but that seems impossible because we need that oil, we need that gas to move, to go to work, to do all of the things that we need to do, even to warm this building. Even our trees are gone. We can't even burn wood anymore. It's against the law. We can't have fires. So what do we do? And so that's the question I will leave, because I don't know the answer.
I just so appreciate her humility in saying, I don't know the answer, but here's the situation. And this particular interview, I think she does such a great job of showing how those traditional perspectives on things fit in with what's going on in contemporary society. She's talking about how elders and scientists can work together to solve some of these problems.
I think about classrooms who could offer that to their students as they're learning to realize the importance of both the indigenous wisdom and the science that we're learning.
Right.
I think that's a beautiful mix.
Right.
So when we use these videos, there are well over 350 of these video clips on the Teachings of Our Elders website. And one of the things that Scott and I have put together to help teachers and whoever wants to use these to sort of get their thinking started are some questions. And so there are two groups of questions that we have written for each video, and they are simply a jumping off point, something for you to get you started thinking about it and see where it takes you. So when we think about the kinds of questions, one kind of question that we offer is what we call a learn about question. This is where we're just really digging into the content that was shared. It's something that you might research, you might Google it, you might talk to another elder about it, maybe a certain piece of content. So, for example, when Gladys talks about all of the coal going by in trains, maybe researching how much coal does get exported out of North Dakota.
Where's it going?
Those are things you might research. But then we want to also have students and the learner think about it from a very personal standpoint. So would you like to talk about the learn from?
Sure. The learn from questions really are, I think when we came up with this idea, it was our attempt to do what we felt like the elders really wanted, which is not just to give information. but to give something that's transformative. When you traditionally come to an elder and say, I'd like your help with something, I want to know about this, it's because you want to have some part of your life transformed by this bit of wisdom or this story that they're going to share. And so the learn from questions really invite learners, listeners, to make a personal connection. So we'll look at these learn from questions from Gladys's interview, just so you can see what kinds of questions those do. And these aren't the only questions you can make, but we try to help teachers design some of their own learn from questions to help their learners connect deeply. So number one, what do you think should be done to ensure that there are plenty of resources for everyone for all time? Number two, how good am I at conserving resources like electricity, gas, or even food? Number three, what role does technology play in my life? What technologies are helpful to me? Are there any that might not be so helpful? What are they? And four, who do I turn to seek wisdom about difficult decisions? Are they trustworthy? So these are things that might lead to some journaling, might lead to some discussion. We often offer multiple questions, not because we want students to answer every question, but because we want to give them multiple opportunities for connecting. And one may work for this student, a different one may work for this student. And so giving that choice is an important piece of I think, recognizing student agency and choosing what they'd like to pursue.
We really like to frame it as setting up invitations.
Right.
You know, when you have that choice, when you have the ability to choose whether or not you're going to take the invitation, take what you're invited into, that changes how you see it. It changes how you respond to it. And it can become even more personal. If it's something I know, I can take this and do with it what I need to do with it to learn. And we really have enjoyed using these with learners of all ages, whether they're students or adults,
right.
The teachers that we work with. What we hear over and over and over is that is the transformative piece of connecting with these elders. When I can listen to what they have to say and then make that personal connection somewhere in me with something I have experienced or I know about, it makes the learning just all the better.
And then when we sit down
Yes.
to share some of that, and I get to listen to how you connected or how
Right.
this other person connected, it becomes even richer. And it becomes really a way of building community in a classroom or community in a school.
Yes.
Well, we appreciate your time with us. You've gotten a little bit of an introduction to the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings. We hope you'll continue to pursue that. You can find all of this and so much more at teachingsofourElders.org.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Scott Simpson.
And I'm Sharla Steever.
And we're going to be talking in this segment about the North Dakota Learning Principles, a brand new exciting project that was just worked on by the Indigenous elders of the state.
As well as teachers.
As well as some teachers, yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, I think it was Superintendent Baszler's idea initially to look at, so we have this wonderful set of essential understandings that are all of the what it is the elders in the state really want their children and grandchildren to know about themselves and about their neighbors. But then there was so how? How do we do that?
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah.
Why do we do that? And so I really appreciate Superintendent Baszler's thinking around this, that it would be good to bring some of these same elders, but others as well, and teachers who've been using these for a little while together to talk about, so what does it look like when we are able to set up our classroom, set up the learning environment in the very best possible way from an Indigenous perspective.
Yeah.
Not that it's for teaching only Indigenous students,
Right.
but this is how we do it with that guidance and wisdom from the Indigenous people of the state.
And that's one of the things that we talked about as we were, Sharla and I facilitated this, and we came together. We talked about what is this and what is it, who is it for, and the clarification that this is for all learners,
Yes.
no matter what their background is. But this is an Indigenous perspective on learning, on what that looks like. What are learners? What do we need to do in response to helping them to learn and to grow? So we began really with just a whole lot of almost free-for-all sharing. What are the important elements? It was a little bit difficult to know where to start with such a huge broad expanse of ideas, but began to identify some of the key elements and see how they fit together, because we knew that what we needed was something that was fairly straightforward and simple if we wanted teachers to be able to implement it. It's great to have a huge, massive document with all kinds of stuff in it, but how many teachers have the time to go through all of that?
Right.
So keeping it fairly straightforward and simple, but also true to what was coming organically out of those elders, as far as this is who learners are. This is what learning is about.
And so we ended up with, after that brainstorm, just a huge amount of information about what learning is and what learners are. And so what we discovered, though, is that we could start to group them into these ideas about learning and teaching into categories. And we ended up, we really didn't have a structure that we were trying to build it into or make it fit into. We just kind of went with how it came together with the elders and teachers in the room. And what we discovered was there were about 4 big categories.
Right.
And then the other really important piece we discovered about this is there was a couple things happening in there as we talked about it. One of the things was all about who learners are and what learning is. And then there was the response of, so if we know this about learners and learning, what do the teachers need to do?
Right.
And so it led to a very beautiful structure for these to live in.
Right. And this is, I think this was prompted by, but not exclusively in service to, the Senate Bill 2304. That is, everyone's really excited about this. It's requiring some additional Indigenous history to be embedded in every student's learning. And this is something that is a huge and wonderful tool, maybe not for providing the content for that, because that's there in the NDNAEU, in the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings. But how do I do that in a good way?
Right.
If I'm going to bring these things into my classroom, how do I do it in a way that is consistent with what the Indigenous elders would like to see done for their students, for their children, but also for everyone's children? So.
Right. And I think it's also important to realize it's the NDNAEU, but also there are all sorts of different local curriculums being developed. And so these are also in service to that.
Yeah.
That if we can learn how to create the best possible learning environment for our students, no matter what we're using with them by way of curriculum, will hopefully be enhanced because they are in a trusting space. They are in a place that is meeting the needs of their learning.
Right, right. So we'll go ahead and dive into this, and we'll pull up the images in the document on your screen so you can read along with us as we look through these. The first section that you'll see there talks about learning and learners in this way. Learning is purposeful as reflected in standards, culture, the individual, group identities, relevance to the learner, the teacher, and the community. Learners are sacred, interconnected with their ancestors, Mother Earth, and need acknowledgement of this connection in their learning environments. So in my thinking, as we listened to the elders and heard what they were sharing, these two things fit together in the sense that learners need to know that there's a reason why they're doing things. They need to understand that there's a purpose. We need to be clear as teachers, as educators, about what our purpose is. We need to know clearly the purposes and the values of the community, of the parents. And then a piece of that is recognizing that every learner is incredibly sacred, that they have agency, and that they have motivation that is internal, and that they need to understand. Not just do this. Mm-hmm. They need to understand why this is important. And they need to believe it's important as well. To what degree we can do that is going to be incredibly helpful. So the response then, if we look at what educators must do in response to those understandings, educators must commit to understand, appreciate, celebrate, and connect with learners' individual identities, cultural heritage, first languages, valued sites and practices, family backgrounds, and community events. And educators must holistically integrate cultural content and value culturally responsive practices into all aspects of curriculum and learning, rather than merely providing cultural add-ons in order to effectively build trust with learners. And this is really all about that, recognizing that learners are sacred by recognizing that trust needs to be built. And that doesn't just mean building it, it means being trustworthy. And that means I need to know who my learners are. I need to know their backgrounds. I need to know as much as I can. I can't know everything, but I need to be open to bringing in their experiences, their culture, their community knowledge, bringing that in as a key piece of our learning. And that's really what culturally responsive practice is.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just thinking about how recently when we were working with a group of teachers and we shared this first one, the response was, how do we do this with 120 students?
Right.
And so it just made me think about, this can feel overwhelming, but I think what we're really talking about here and what the elders were sort of framing in their minds is that it's not that you are always 100% knowing of every need of every child you serve. That's impossible. There's no way we could do that. But it's about an awareness. It's about an awareness that this is important to learning and to my learners. And when I notice it in someone, if I see something in a student that needs to be addressed, cared for, something offered for it, for them, then we do that we're aware that we need to do that. So it's like being in a stance that's ready.
Right.
It's not about knowing it all the time, because that's more than a full-time job.
Yeah. It's a stance, it's an environment that you create where students know, even if my teacher doesn't know me completely, I feel safe to show myself, to really show up in this classroom and let them see who I am. That's huge. That's huge.
And it's also knowing that today might not be the day that I need that from my teacher.
Right.
but tomorrow it might be.
That's right.
And I know that my teacher will be ready and in a place that they're able to help me with whatever it is I need.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we'll go on to number 2. Number 2 says learning is personal and impacted by families, our past and our future, our imaginations and values, and historic and current traumas. Learners are unique and thrive in a safe and supportive learning environment. So I love this one because this is something that I really spent a lot of time with when I was in the classroom. I loved the unique qualities of my students.
Yeah.
That was just that was a blessing to me as a teacher to see those individual things come out, the quirks that they have, the particular learning needs they might have. So that whole idea of learners being unique is just at the heart of this, because every single person, we know this, every person is unique and have unique needs for their learning. And also that it's personal. For myself, I'm the only one who knows what's going on inside me.
Right.
What my experiences have been, what I have inside of me to construct new knowledge. It's very personal. If I missed a big chunk of school in first grade, I may have a lot of issues in my learning. It's very personal to me, and I have needs that need to be taken care of in that setting because of that.
And the route I may need to take to get to the learning I need may be different than every other student in the room.
Right. So then if we believe this, that learning is personal and learners are unique, then as educators must learn from their learners while recognizing learners' experiences and knowledge as important curricular resources. Number 2B, educators must have an awareness of and take into account learners' historical or generational privileges, traumas, economic situations, abilities, broad or limited experiences as they design and facilitate learning opportunities. And then lastly, educators must recognize educational and societal inequities and consider themselves active change agents working toward equity. So knowing these things about our students, knowing they're unique and knowing that learning is personal, then we have that responsibility to know a little bit more about who our learners are and figure out what are their needs and are they being met. When we think about equity, that's a huge one in this, that's, I think, connected to all 3 of the educators must pieces. That equity sort of goes through all of them. That if I know that I have students who have particular traumas or particular privileges, then their learning is going to look a little different than my students who don't.
Right.
And so it's not that I'm going to absolutely change everything I do for every student, but I might need to change some things, or I might need to go at it in a different way. If I am working with a group of students who've never been outside of their reservation community, and I'm sharing a standardized test that's talking about an escalator, that is making an assumption about them and what they know that they couldn't possibly have experienced.
Right.
That's an inequity. That's a really simple example, but that's what we need to be aware of.
I love the idea of going into a school year, going into a semester, going into a new group of students, thinking, it's their responsibility to learn from me, but it's my responsibility to learn from them.
Yes.
This is not just about information delivery, I'm the expert, and here we go. This is about me getting to know them, us building relationships that are going to serve us all the way through the year or the semester or the time we have together. Because as I get to know my students better, I'm able to be more responsive to what they need. And they're able to have more trust in sharing with me things that they need. So it all just works wonderfully. Such good guidance from the elders. So the third section begins with learning is invitational and it can't be forced. It needs to be intrinsically motivated with learning opportunities presented in multiple modes: oral, written, song, story, experiential. Learners are curious, naturally motivated to learn in the context of strong, trusting relationships between educators and learners. We talk about invitation a whole lot, but recognizing that an invitation into learning recognizes that learners are curious. They want to learn. If they're human beings, they want to learn. They want to know more. And sometimes the challenge that we have is that making assignments doesn't always feel very invitational. And our learners or our students may be curious about something that's other than this assignment I've given them. And so having that flexibility, having that capacity to build in choice, we recognize that there are some have-tos in school. That's always going to be there. But making sure that that's balanced out with lots and lots of student agency, learner agency, choice, recognizing that my attempts to motivate my students are not coming from the outside in. Me looking for the next reward or the next punishment that's going to get them to do what I need them to do. But I'm looking for those things that they're already interested in, those intrinsic things. What are they interested in? What do they want to do? Let's figure out how to make that the centerpiece of our learning for the day. So the response is, educators must enable learners to learn intrinsically, using their own curiosities and interests, making connections that are relevant in their lives. And educators must be trustworthy and work to build positive relationships with all students, families, and communities who historically have been and continue to be mistreated. And one of the things that I think this recognizes is that there is, especially in our region, due to the history of boarding schools, of assimilation policies, and those sorts of things, there is an extra need. It's always important to build trust and to be trustworthy. But there's an extra need to do that when I'm dealing with Indigenous students, Indigenous learners, Indigenous communities and parents and grandparents. I know that there are parents and grandparents of students who are in our schools now who had very traumatic experiences not long ago with school. Those traumatic experiences place an understandable distrust within them for a teacher, a school, a process. We've got to recognize that and go above and beyond at being trustworthy, at knowing who our students are, knowing who their parents are, knowing the communities, and letting them know us and know that our intentions are to help their young ones to grow, not to do something to them,
Right. That's so important. And I love that the whole idea of their motivation, it is intrinsic. It's there. We just have to tap into it, I don't know that I've ever met a child who didn't want to learn something. Now, plenty of times in the classroom, there were kids that were like, I don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
But then that's also a cue to me. What have we been spending our time on?
Right.
What is it? Am I due for something that is just really right in the center of what their interest is, and I just haven't quite hit that for a while? Okay, let's spend some time there, because you don't have to do it all the time, but if they know it's coming every now and then, it makes a huge difference.
Right.
So the last one, number 4, learning is a journey, allowing whole learners to progress in nonlinear ways in the company of other learners through a growing understanding of North Dakota tribes. Learners are intuitive and are empowered when their needs are met in a holistic way. And this one gets into some kind of specific things to North Dakota, and that was really important to several of the elders that were working on this. And so we wanted to make sure that was included. But that whole idea of learning being a journey, I mean, that's just a beautiful thing, and some people take their journeys really fast. You have runners, who get out there and just tackle it. And then we have others who like to look at things along the way, and it might take them a little longer. And either one of them is okay. Right. The fact that we know it's a journey, that we're headed in a general direction, and that, that the learners will get there. They will get there. And so if we believe that about learners, then a couple things that we can do as educators to support that. Educators must construct learning opportunities from North Dakota tribal sources, research that is current, local perspectives and knowledge that are authentic, specific, and not genericized. And also, educators must foster the growth and well-being of learners in all ways, cognitively, emotionally, physically, socially, and spiritually. And so really what that's getting at is whenever we can, let's bring in some of those things that are specific to this place where we live, and how can we use those things to help address some of those needs that our learners have, no matter what kind of need it might be. And so I really, as I think about this set of 4 principles, it's just beautiful. I'm so thankful to the elders and educators who worked on this because it really helps us see the how and the why. Yeah. And when I think about this, this is up there with other research that's been done about learning in my mind. And I think it's a very appropriate tool for schools to use to think about how do we want learning to look in our school, in our district, with our families. And I think it's a wonderful guide to use for that. And if we don't get it, at a school level or a district level, certainly teachers can benefit from it as well as they think about what they're doing in their classrooms.
Well, and I think that's the way to begin the move toward getting it at a school or district level. I mean, that's not to say that the school and the district don't have a responsibility, but as individual educators come to understand some of these things and begin to implement them, it really fundamentally changes the culture of the school. And I mean the learning culture of the school. When we have that flexibility to allow learners to follow varying pathways that are more suited to their learning needs, when we have this deep respect for every student and for where they're coming from and for the experience and the knowledge that they're bringing with them, and we make sure that the environment of our classrooms and our school are healthy places for all of those things that they're bringing with them to really thrive, and for them to know that I can access all of my experience, all of my wisdom, all my culture stuff. I can access all of that as I try to learn these new things that are being presented to me here at the school.
So we want to thank you for taking time to walk through these learning principles with us, and we hope that you'll find value in them and maybe try some of them out in your setting.
Thank you.
Thanks. Here we are.
Here we are. Hi, I'm Scott Simpson.
And I'm Sharla Steever.
And this segment, we're going to be talking about the inquiry design model for lesson planning.
Also known as the IDM.
The IDM.
We might reference IDM.
That's right. And I want to be clear, we're not experts on the IDM. It is a format, though, that we've used quite a bit over the last 7 or 8 years, maybe. And I've had a lot of experience with using it in different ways and helping teachers to use it. And so we're going to share some of the ways that we found helpful in using that, especially with our area of focus a lot of times, which is implementing Indigenous essential understandings and standards from whatever
Right.
particular content. Bring them together in a good way for students. So.
And just as the name suggests, inquiry design model, it is a question-based lesson plan or unit model. And that's one of the reasons we're drawn to it. Because when we think about some of those things that we've talked about with our learning principles in North Dakota, especially around learners, being curious and having an intrinsic motivation to learn, I think when we ask questions, it shares with the student, it presents the side that I don't have one right thing, one right answer I'm looking for, but rather we're exploring this together. Right. And the questions help us to do that.
And these are the kinds of questions that you design with that in mind. There are lots of different kinds of questions that people create for educational purposes. A lot of times they're for the purpose of assessing, to find out what students have learned and how much they've learned and what they still don't know. This is not that. These are questions that really are designed, like Sharla was saying, to pique their interest, to join their curiosity and the things that I know I'm supposed to be teaching based on standards or essential understandings, and bring those together in a really powerful way.
It's not the only way to do these lessons, but certainly it's been, I think, one of the best ways we've found.
I think it's been helpful also because it's nationally and I think internationally recognized. Also, it gives a consistent sort of approach. One of the things that we do is we have teachers develop a lot of lessons, and then we put those on the website as exemplars.
Right.
Well, when the format and the approach is similar across, the teachers are more likely to use that. So it's been a helpful kind of unifying factor for all the different lessons that teachers have been developing.
So what we'd like to do today is just sort of walk through it and share what the different parts of it are, and then share a lesson that we've developed over the last few years, and show kind of how we took it, the direction we took it in the particular topic that we chose. So one of the things I will also mention about this is it really creates more of a unit than just a lesson. No. We've discovered if you really complete a full IDM using the structure that's provided, it's going to be so much information that you'll probably use it over the course of a week or even a little more than that. So that's helpful too, because it gives you a way to build on your learning.
And by the same token, it's not something that where I would put down my exact script for what I'm going to go through throughout my entire.
It's not Madeline
period.
Hunter.
No, it's not. It's really a broader conceptual framework than that I may fill in. I might need it. If I go from notes when I'm leading a class discussion or something, then I'll probably still need to write down some notes on the side.
Sure.
But the IDM really gives you that conceptual framework of where this is headed and how to make sure it stays heading in the right direction, especially if you're doing it over multiple class gatherings.
Right.
So, one of the things that you should know, we will share with you the website for the IDM. We also have information. A lot of the information we're sharing comes from, you can find on both of our websites, teachingsofourElders.org, as well as wolakotaproject.org, which is the South Dakota website. And both websites have a lot of exemplar lessons created by teachers who are combining their standards at whatever grade level, whatever content, with essential understandings from Indigenous elders. And so lots of good examples of that sort of thing.
Yes. So I think we'll go ahead and just kind of jump in.
Yeah.
And I think the easiest way to begin is just to talk about the different components of an IDM design. And so let's start with the big question that we kick things off with. An IDM, this model uses a broad question to begin with. They call it the compelling question. And the compelling question is really designed to kind of zone in on student curiosity and also connect that with whatever the content is, the standard that you want to address. An example that I've seen on the IDM website is, was the Revolutionary War revolutionary? You know, we're getting into this idea of the content we have to teach about, but also, like we call it the Revolutionary War. Is that accurate? You know, and so then as a student, I might look at that and go, yeah, that's interesting.
Right.
And it might pique my curiosity enough to look a little deeper.
Well, and I think the thing I like about compelling is, you know, if I'm thinking foremost about, is this actually compelling to my students? It really changes the nature of what I'm working on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very certain about what compels me. I may be very certain about what is compelling the particular standards that I'm trying to address, but I have to take into consideration what's compelling to my students. This question helps us bring all of those together if we do it right. And probably it's something where I'm going to get better at it the more I do it. The more often I create these compelling questions, the better I'll get. After that, if you take a look at that example we're showing, we have a section to fill in the standards and practices. And for the teachers that we work with, that includes both their content standards at whatever grade level they're working, as well as the essential understandings in North Dakota. That would be the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings. There are 7 of those. South Dakota has the Oceti-Shakopee Essential Understandings, 7 of those as well. And so what we've done in both of those states is kind of preload the template with those so that they can select which one they actually want to do. But that's the place where you know what's being aligned here. We're bringing together some standards, some essential understandings, and making them work well together.
Right. So the next level, the next piece of this is something called staging the question. And when we think about staging the question, we're starting to narrow the topic a little bit. We're building off that compelling question to try to even develop a little bit more curiosity around the topic. One of the things about the IDM is it starts very broad with the questions. And as we work our way through the different components of it, it narrows down to where you get to something very specific maybe for that day. So this is the particular topic we're going to cover today. And the questions guide us to that place. So the staging the question is the one that's going to start to narrow us down into where are we going with this specifically. It's not quite to the topic of the day, but it's that question in between that begins to narrow it.
Right. And that could be questions that we ask, could be a discussion that we might have, it could be an activity of some sort to really get us in the right place.
Right.
The whole next section, and if you're looking at, you'll see that there are on the standard template there are three columns. We've had teachers who did it with just one column, with 2, or with 3.
Yep.
I suppose you
could do more.
Or you could do more. But this is a way. These are smaller questions that are underneath that compelling question. These questions are called supporting questions. But one of the things that they do is they help build a sort of a scaffolding together. These 3 or 2 or 4 questions scaffold learners up to that larger, compelling question, that bigger question, that overarching question. And then these are followed. I think of these as maybe as a secondary teacher. I think of them as a class period.
Sure.
Maybe with this class period, we're going to deal with this particular supporting question and the activities and things that go with that. Following class period, we'll either finish that up or we'll move on to the next supporting question. But then what we have done in that way is we've scaffolded with 2 or 3 supporting questions our learning toward really having a grasp of that compelling question overall. And these questions guide us then, these supporting questions guide us into the thing that follows that, which I think Sharla's going to talk about.
Something I want to mention, though, too, about those questions is, I think they're important to actually ask your students, at some point during the class period or during this little mini unit, we're going to actually address the question. But what they also do is, as an instructor, they help me think about it in the way that sets me up for not just giving a lecture or a set of content that is, make sure you've got this, take your notes and, copy, repeat, regurgitate it back to me at some point. This is actually setting me up for maybe even dialogue with my students. If we ask the question, are we ready to think about what their answers are going to be? And so I really like that about it. So as we continue through the structure of the IDM, the next thing that you would do is develop your performance tasks. And so when we think about these are the meat and potatoes of your lesson, I guess you could say. It's the stuff it's the activity. It might be something you're talking about that day. It might be a video you're sharing. It might be something you're going to have your students write about, or maybe it's a class discussion. Maybe it's an actual activity where you're making something. At the elementary level, we might be doing something like that, or secondary too. But so it's the stuff of the lesson. It's how we're going to work on learning it.
In many ways, it's what you were just talking about in response to the supporting question. Rather than giving my learners the answer, I've constructed some tasks for us to engage with that will lead us into discovering what the answers. And the challenging thing about that is they may not come to the same exact answer that I would. And they may come to several different answers. But that's also the exciting part, because what creates a better discussion, what creates a better engagement, then, hey, we see this different. There are multiple perspectives on this here. Hey, let's get to the heart of that. And that's also, and I think, a big value of this approach. It gives a space to model civil engagement, where we're gonna have this engagement. I'm gonna be respectful. We may see it differently, but I'm gonna engage with you, and we're gonna do it in a way that is productive, not destructive and angry.
Right. It's good.
The next section on the IDM itself are featured sources. Now these could be certainly they could be books. You could have in fact, because ours are the IDM lesson plans that we have are web based. Usually they are links, links to if it is a book, might be a link over to Amazon or some other bookseller to maybe purchase that book. More often than not, because as a part of our work, we do a lot of elder interviews that we have on the website. Sometimes they are links over to an interview with an elder, or over to a video, another video that's like that, or it could be a link over to a document, a Google document, an online resource of some sort. But what's really handy about that, especially when we talk about the way we're using it as exemplar lessons that many teachers can access, the resources are right there. They can click, they can go check out those resources. The downside, of course, is over time, some of those resources, the links may go dead. But that's one of the things that, as a teacher, I think the goal is not to just to have everything you might need right there, but it's to have everything you need to get started. And then you may supplement that with, you may know a resource that's better than the one that was linked here. Great. Use that, you know.
Yes. The other thing I'll mention about this is because everything is right in this document, if you go to distance learning or online learning, you know, for whatever reasons, whether it's pandemic or weather or whatever it might be, it's all right there and could be shared out with your students easily as well. So another piece of this that I really like are the things that the structure provides for what to do once those key questions have been maybe answered or we've been grappling with them for a while. Now what do we do with what we've learned? And so one of the things is there's 2 opportunities to summarize what the learning has been and to create some sort of performance task. And so one of those things is, we call it here with the actual IDM one, an argument. We used a different term, it seems like.
I think someone didn't like the word argument. It sounded too angry. But
dialogue or something like that.
I think the idea is, though, that you know, you make the case for something.
You might choose a side. Choose a perspective and you build off of that. And so, you know, this is another opportunity for that civil discourse you were talking about. You know, having students learn how to disagree with one another and how to do that in a respectful way where we don't leave, like you said, angry, but rather that we're able to talk through and that we're listening in such a way that we might even be open to being changed.
And I think also how to support my position with like real facts, real research. Because if I can't support it, then maybe I need to rethink it.
Right.
You know?
Yes. So that's the argument piece of it. And then the other one, do you want to do this one? The extension?
Sure, yeah. The extension, which is, I think, I really like this because it has 2 purposes. I think one is it gives a choice if the argument is not going to work for a particular student. You'll have this second piece that's another performance task that they can do that's maybe a little bit different. And I think the teacher can think through that. If a teacher would like to give choice, you say, here's a choice, here's a choice. Both of these are going to demonstrate your capacity to show what you've learned. But you've got a choice. But the other piece of this is it may be that for some students, they've done the argument, that task, but they want to do more. And I know that happens. I know it doesn't happen all the time. But many times, if a student really does get excited about it, they want to extend that a little bit, and they can do this other thing. And so I think it's good to have at least a couple of ways to demonstrate the learning that give students a couple of options, whether they're choosing or whether they're stacking one on top of the other to do both.
Right. So the last one is taking informed action. And when we think about that, what we're doing is we're seeing, is there a place that my learning can go beyond the classroom? And so as I think about that, it could be something as simple as creating maybe a paper or something, a drawing, a project of some sort that gets shared out with the school. You know, sometimes I always love to have my students writing out in the hallway where they could feel like they were published, you know, that they're being seen by others. And so it might be something like that. It could also be, you know, if you're in a civics class or something like that and you're working through some issues within a community, maybe it's writing a letter to the editor, or it could be real life things like that. And that's really what this is designed to do, is to make it real, make it something that extends beyond the classroom where we do all of that learning into our real worlds.
I'm thinking back to one of the things that we talked about with the learning principles that were identified by the indigenous elders, being purposeful.
Yes.
It makes the learning purposeful. hey, I've learned this thing. I've developed this strong and supportable opinion. So I want to communicate it to someone who might be able to do something about it. Maybe it's writing something to the mayor. Maybe it's going to some meetings or something like that. So it's a real world sort of conclusion. One of the things that I want to drive home, though, as we get to the end of this, was developed for social studies. Mm-hmm. We have supported teachers in utilizing this basic format with some, a few adaptations in any area. Mm-hmm. These are things that could be used in a math plan, in a science plan, certainly in a literature or art or music, anything that where learning is going to happen. This inquiry method, I think, has a place. It may need to be tweaked a little bit. You may not have a real argument in an art lesson, but in a sense you might. Yeah. You might say, here's what I'm trying to communicate, and this is why I'm trying to communicate it, and this is how I support that. Even with a piece of art or a music composition or something. So think in terms of this could be much broader than just social studies.
Right. Right. So what we'd like to do then is, now that you know what the different components of the IDM are, we'd like to just share an example that we developed. Now, there are hundreds of these on the website. If you go to teachingsofourElders.org or woolakotaproject.org, you're going to find literally hundreds on each one. In both states, we are not at the state level allowed to ever
create curriculum?
Create, wow.
Or require.
Require or create curriculum. Boy, that's kind of a tongue twister.
Tongue twister there.
And so this isn't curriculum. What this is they are exemplar lessons. Right. And not exemplar in the standard of like top-notch, best of show kind of thing, but rather that they are examples from teachers in each state who actually work with students in classrooms, and these are the things that they've developed.
Real teachers. So,
real teachers.
Some of them you may read one and say, wow, that's just amazing. I can't wait to do that, and I want to do it exactly the way it is. Mm-hmm. Some of them you might look through and say, you know what, there's some good ideas there. I'm going to harvest those and then change it up a little bit, do it the way I want to do it. So take it in that sense. This one that we're going to pull up, though, is one that was developed just a couple of years ago, I think, when we were updating some things with the North Dakota website, the teachingsofourElders.org website. And the name of the lesson is What Makes a Good Human Being? So we'll just go through this and talk about the sections. We've already described what those sections are. We'll kind of give you a sense of one way to do that with this particular lesson. So we begin with that compelling question. And in this one, the compelling question is, what experiences have I had on my own or with my family or community that have helped to shape my or our values? So this is really this is a values sort of lesson, thinking about human values, which could be an entry into thinking about things having to do with laws that are made, with norms that are established in communities, policies, things like that. A good civics lesson, really, because that comes out of basic human values. But the big compelling question is, how do we get those?
And what I like about this question is it also addresses experiences.
Right.
So that looks at me as an individual. So what have I experienced in my life that has caused me to have the particular set of values that I have? Because if I can understand that, I can understand why another person feels as strongly as they do about their values.
Absolutely.
So that, I really like that question. I think it draws the learner in. That next section where it's about the standards and practices, that's really just where you're going to put what are the particular content standards that you want to address, and also if you're going to be addressing essential understanding. So in this one, there are writing standards addressed, there are speaking and listening standards addressed, and there are music standards addressed with how this was developed. With the essential understandings,
this one is up, it's up at the top.
Right.
One.
So this one is connected to NDNAEU 1, Sacred Relatives, and 2, Learning and Storytelling, and also 7, Native Identity. And you'll find that a lot of them do cross over. That just kind of happens by nature of what the essential understandings are. Right. So, but we do try to encourage teachers to limit that the best they can, because if we just always say it's all 7, it kind of loses its meaning. So, but that's where you just kind of lay that out. You address where it is what it is you're going to be focused on during your lessons.
So a lot of great language arts standards and a music standard. Staging the question. Have a whole group discussion. In what ways do human beings identify and share their values concerning what a good member of our community is, does, or becomes? How do they make these ideas interesting and memorable for their children, grandchildren, and future generations? So this staging of the question is really a discussion where we kind of draw out of the learners, where do these things come from? How do we communicate them? How do we make them interesting? And that, to me, that draws on both their personal experiences, but also kind of extrapolating, I don't know, where does that come from? What would make it interesting? How did my parents try to make things interesting for me to learn what's important? We may get into talking about, Sunday school classes or a 4-H or going in to visit grandparents, all kinds of things that are maybe used, or maybe even television shows,
Sure.
What kinds of values do I learn by watching something like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers? I guess I'm dating myself now.
Yeah.
So
they're still good shows.
I know they are.
All right. So then as we move into the supporting questions, in this case, we had 3. But, like we said earlier, it could be 1, it could be 2, but in this case we have 3. And so, I'll read through these, but, just know that you don't have to have this many, for each of the unit or the lessons that you do. So the first one is, how do Indigenous communities develop and share their values or teachings? And so when I think about that one, that's really interesting to me. When you think about learning about a community and you discover the things that are most important there, there's almost always some stories there. There are things that have happened that have made that particular issue or whatever it is very, very important to that place and time and those people. So then from there, we'll dig into that question as we move through the performance tasks and other things. The second one that is listed here is, what role does storytelling play in Indigenous and other communities to help pass along important knowledge about being good human beings? And I know when we talk about the essential understandings, there's one just on learning and storytelling, because that's so important. And so this helps us to dig into that. What is it about storytelling that is so important? And I know for us, as we've been learning about this story and the research that's been done on it, stories and narratives help us to frame it in our minds in such a way that it's very memorable. So we do know that. But, so you would take that question then and move in a direction with it to talk about why that's important. And then the last one, how do I develop and share my personal values? So then it sort of takes us to that individual place. So I've had these experiences. I've noticed that my community has had these particular experiences. All of that is helping me to shape my values.
So we've got a kind of a lesson going toward that big question about where values come from. That we're digging into Indigenous communities because we have some specific knowledge. We're going to get some resources there a little bit about Indigenous communities, how to communicate, what's role storytelling, and then maybe think about what is it that I do That helps me clarify that for myself. That moves us into the performance tasks. We have a mixture of things. Under that first one, where the compelling question was about how indigenous communities develop and share them, we have an interview that we did with Alex Dakota, who is a culture teacher. He's from Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and he shares about the 7 teachings. And so there's watching of that video, and then some journaling that comes about around the learn from questions that are connected with that video. And then those learn from questions are listed. And so there's also an extension of that into the animals that Mr. Dakota shares, and a connection with those animals. And why would this animal be connected with this particular virtue and value? And so some thought about that. Also some extension about listing of virtues from multiple cultures. There's a table that you can use that shows where it's nice to look at different cultures and the virtues and how they're similar and how they may also vary a little bit. And of course, there's a note in there about adapting this to the learner's level, depending on what your learners are prepared for. In the second column, which was the one about storytelling, we have copies of the story of the Giants by Joseph Marshall III, who is also an indigenous elder. He is from Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. He is Sichongu Lakota. And so the reading of that story or the listening of it, he has a wonderful recording of that. And then a sharing of an interview with Gladys Hawk, who is an elder from Standing Rock. She talks about listening to stories from her grandmother when she was little at night. And then the questions, learn from questions that are connected with her story. Then learners are invited to find a story that teaches a lesson. It could be from a book, or it could be a story that's been told to you by a parent, a relative, a friend, or someone else. Write or tell your own version of the story and what it means to you and what lessons might be learned by others. 2 to 3 pages, verbal or media presentation. And that could be adapted to the levels. So basically what we're learning from Mr. Marshall, Gladys Hawk, how these stories impact, how they work, and then myself finding one either that I've been told or that's been told to me and retelling that in a way that's powerful. So both of these kind of outside of myself, although I'm connected with it. This last one then moves us into that last question, developing and sharing my own values. This is personal for me, so I'll just admit that. So I put together this lesson. So one of the things that I developed, I'm a songwriter, so I developed a journal that has some of the basic stories behind some of the songs. You listen to the song and then do some journaling about some of the connections that you make personally with that song. And so they take some time to listen to a few of those, sharing, doing some journaling, and then looking at the songwriter comments, and then coming back together, and then exploring through journaling an experience that you have had that brought you a new understanding or lesson about how to live life in a better way. Develop the story of an experience into, and then they have multiple options. And this is one of those things that we like to do. You know,
the invitations.
You're invited to do this in whatever way works best for you. A song, a poem, a story, a drawing, a media presentation, an essay, whatever works best for you. And then schedule some days for that to be, presented in some way. So, in my mind, these 3 columns here move us from learning about an indigenous way of developing values to a real specific storytelling approach to now what are my values and how might I be able to communicate those.
Right.
This is more than 3 class periods.
Probably.
This might be like
a week, 2 weeks.
Week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'll just go ahead and finish this up because we've already mentioned most of that. But then in the featured resources underneath each of those columns, we have links to all of those various videos and things like that. So those are right there for any teacher who might choose to use that.
So then as we look at what the summative performance task is going to be, there's a couple things listed here. There's a project-based one where we talk about develop a personal triad of important personal virtues for yourself. One should come from a traditional indigenous teaching or virtue that you connected with. One should come from a story that you've read or which has been told to you. And one should be one that you developed for yourself from your own experiences. Develop an essay or speech, art project, music, composition, or something else that shows how these important traits can work together to support growth into becoming a better human being. I love the idea of drawing from multiple places, because we can get really set on, well, this is just how my family is, so I'm like this. Well, yeah, that's great. And then, we're also in the world with other people, and we're in the world with lots of stories, and can we draw from those as well? And it gives a student practice in doing that. So I really like that. And then I like the idea too of thinking about it first and then moving into creating a project with it. So whatever that project might look like, a writing or something that's presented.
And that's the extension, presenting, creating a public time to present to the school, the community. This reminds me of, and I know there are lots of approaches to the senior project, but
Sure.
It would be really neat if senior projects were values-based. I'm going to tell you who I am as a person, what I've really valued through this very elaborate project, and I'm going to present it publicly. So as I graduate from the school, who I am
Right.
and what I value.
It's a great idea.
So, the final piece, taking informed action or real-world application, develop a set of shared classroom virtues, values, or teachings from the various projects of students in the classroom to refer back to for the rest of the school year. Have a plan for how to make sure everyone's periodically reminded of them and how each person might be able to reflect on how he or she is progressing with putting them into action. I know a lot of teachers do classroom norms with students, set of classroom rules with students where we talk through and figure this out. A set of classroom values may be a little richer than that. Maybe they're not telling us specifically what we're going to do and not do, but they're telling us what we really value, what we believe in. And if those things actually come from the students in the room, some really rich work that they've done, and you have those reminders. Maybe it's a painting that's on the wall that someone did. Maybe it's a recording that we listen to every once in a while. Maybe it's a brief poem that's posted on the wall over here that can remind us of certain things that we really agree on that are really important. That can just create a whole really rich culture within the classroom, within that class, that group of students.
So we hope that today, as we've shared with you here for the last little bit, that you have a little bit more of an understanding of what the IDM is about, how to maybe go about creating one of your own, and we'll share some places where you can find these resources. We've shared that they are on both of our websites, but we'll also share some other places links that you can go to if you're interested in learning more about it.
And I hope that we've shown how beginning with really rich questions can lead us not just to, did we answer that question right, but really some really deep inquiry that can lead to some really rich projects, I think, that students can get really excited about and have ownership for.
So thank you.